We've been working with Sue for the past couple of years on a project that we hope will make searching cemeteries in Portsmouth much easier. Sue has been a wonderful advocate for the library and its historic collections, and we're very pleased to have her with us tonight. She will be your guide to the past for this evening, and her qualifications include being a lifelong Portsmouth resident who was able to trace her family roots back to the Isles of Shoals in the 1600s. She's also a genealogy buff and has spent over 15 years on her family research. And since 2021, Sue has led the city's cemetery committee as its co-chair and has led projects including cleaning headstones, raising funds, and navigating the offices of City Hall, which is a feat in and of itself. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Sue Cemetery Sterry.
Thank you very much, Paige. Thank you all for coming. I was really thinking maybe 4 or 5 people would show up, but I'm glad a lot more of you have. Just a quick question, how many people here dabble in genealogy by any chance? Okay, you appreciate some of my statements. And I'm assuming the rest of you are sort of cemetery buffs. You like to go to cemeteries wherever you go. A lot of people don't admit that they put it on their list when they go someplace new, but there are lots and lots of us out there. As Katie said, I was born and raised here and been here all my life, actually. So I'm just going to start in and fill in some information as we go along. I found this on a headstone down at Point of Graves, which is our oldest, and I thought this gentleman is 1686, I think. But I found it very interesting that way back then, it said, "Show me the manner in which a community cares for its dead, and I will show you the tender mercies of its people and their loyalty to high ideals." It just struck me because once I started doing my research, I've gone all the way back to 1853, and I probably have compiled 25 articles from the Portsmouth Herald or the Gazette, whatever it was called, complaining about the conditions of our cemeteries. And that's right up through last year. So this is an issue for a lot of communities. So I have no idea why I really joined the cemetery committee other than it needs to be done. And I think we should personally respect what we have. This is the first, this is part of the family. When I was doing my genealogy, once I hit a certain spot and found out some of my grandparents were buried here, I went to Pleasant Street Cemetery and found my grandmother and grandfather, and I was just shocked. I was appalled at how bad the headstones were. The lawn was mowed, but no real grass or what have you. So, and I think it was fate because about 4 or 5 weeks later, someone called me up and said, "Hey, we want to start a cemetery committee and we think you should be on it." So I said, "Okay, I'll do it." And then next thing I know, I found myself raising my hand saying, "Oh, sure, I'll co-chair for this cemetery." That was 3 years ago. So I haven't done much family genealogy in the last 3 years. Everything has been around the cemeteries. So this is 6th, 7th, and 8th generation. These are all, not all my kids. they're my family. My niece is there, who's, the Hams are her grandparents too, my niece and nephew. And so last year for my Mother's Day gift, I said, "You're all coming to Pleasant Street and help clean the 76 headstones that are there." And I thought I would get a lot of pushback, but I didn't. They came, and once they really got into it, even the teenagers they wanted more headstones to clean. So
I've got something that can come my way.
Oh yeah. Anytime you have a question, just holler out. So these are my grandparents, Captain Ephraim Ham, who died in 1798, and his wife Mary Ham, who died in 1777. Mary married him in 1736. However, she was born out in Gosport. I haven't found a lot. Once you get back this far, finding out information about women gets really hard. And they had 10 children. So, and according to records, they all made it through childbirth on to older age. Ephraim signed the association test of 1776. Does anybody know, or familiar? Well, back in the day, once we declared independence from Britain, and it wasn't just Portsmouth, it was all up and down the coast, you had to sign a pledge that you wanted to be a revolutionary. They didn't call it then, or you supported the Tories. In Portsmouth, there were 496 men, just men approximately, who signed it. There were 30 who did not, but there were 15 of those who were declared untrustworthy, and they were actually exported from Portsmouth to Exeter, and some of them spent as many as 2 years locked up because they wouldn't come right out and say that they supported America and not the English. Whether or not they did, there was no way anybody could prove that unless you signed it, as far as they were concerned, you were a Tory. So I think when I read what my grandfather did, this is probably why I'm on the cemetery committee. He was a sea captain during the time. He was a privateer, so he was authorized to raid ships and take their goods because that's what the government wanted them to do. He was a constable for 4 or 5 years in Portsmouth after the Revolution. And I haven't been able to find out, maybe somebody will know, he held the measurer of wood. I'm assuming it had something to do with trade, so we in New Hampshire and Maine cut a lot of white pine and stuff and sent it all over the world for mass. So I'm assuming it has something to do with that. But he was that for like 10 years, so I don't know anything more. Someday I will. And then he was also one of those men in the city that went out and collected money to support the poor at the time, because there was a poor farm. So he was one of those people that raised money to continue to do that. And mow, I have no idea. I looked that up. So I don't know if he mowed cemeteries or what they did, but. So that's how I got into this. It was my family. The oldest cemetery right now is Point of Graves, and if you don't know, Point of Graves, everyone knows where Prescott Park is, right? Yeah. It's the burial ground right next door to that. Actually, where Prescott Park is, that wasn't there. The road that's next to Point of Graves was there, but Prescott Park is part of filling in of Puddle Dock. So that cemetery was actually out on a point at one time. Right now, there are 9 headstones that remain, original headstones from the 1600s. I've seen reports where there were, maybe 50 years ago, there were 25 headstones left. None of this I can prove or disprove. It's just information from the Athenaeum, other historical books, and not all of it jives, but you just take the best guess that you can and let people know that none of this is in concrete. Also, back in the day, women, even if you were a wealthy woman, or a consort is what they used to call wives back then, didn't get headstones. So if you got a headstone, you might have just your name on it and that's it. So when we start restoring over there, we could find some more headstones buried, 2 or 3 feet below the ground, but that project's off the way. And just a little tidbit, the word cemetery didn't come into use until I think it's the 1900s. Before then, they were either burying grounds or they were family graveyards. So cemetery is a recent use or a name for cemeteries. This is William Button, who I quoted earlier. He was a very wealthy merchant from what little I could find out about him. He fell off his own ship, the Lion, and he drowned. There were no details, it just states fell off his ship and that's it. And I do know the carver of this thanks to Glenn Knobloch, if anybody recognizes his name. He does a series of books on cemeteries and bridges and Revolutionary. All the carvers back in this time frame were in Boston. So you had to have been wealthy because this would have been carved back in Boston. It would have been brought up by a ship and then carried to whatever cemetery you were going to do. And a lot of them were silversmiths. We wouldn't even have headstones like this right now. So, I mean, this is a very ornate headstone, and it's one that you'll find online. A lot of people use it as an example of the carvers of Boston. Next one is Anne Jaffrey. Now, she's one I've spent 5 weeks on this project. What I did, we have 3,000 headstones here, and I've seen them all more than once. So I just went through and randomly picked out headstones that I knew were not famous people per se, like Whipple and Langdon and other people. So I had no idea when I started this if I'd be able to find any information or a little bit or a lot. So she happens to be one, this is all I could find about her. She was 18 years old. She died 2 weeks after giving birth on Great Island, which is Newcastle. Her husband owned land out on the Isles of Shoals. So I put, for those who may not know where the Isles of Shoals, they're 13 miles off the mouth of the river here in Portsmouth. And he was a very wealthy merchant out there because he catered to all the cod fishermen that lived out in Gosport. So again, her husband was wealthy for sure because of the type of headstone that she has.
She had one.
Yeah,
And she had one.
yeah, you're right. Captain Tobias Lear, and I put the number 1 after his name because there was Tobias Lear II, who was a part of George Washington's inner circle. However, Tobias Lear I, he actually built the Ranger, which is the ship that John Paul Jones took over, and sailed the West Indies into France and places like that. So, did you have a,
Oh, it's on the flag.
Raleigh's on the flag, not the Ranger.
Right, I'm sorry.
That's okay. It all gets a lot of R's in the world. His son, Tobias Lear, and there was no record of like the second or the junior or anything like that. He was the personal secretary of George Washington, and he was beside Washington when he died. And there's controversy even to this day if Tobias Lear II confiscated a lot of papers and burned them or what have you of things that he didn't want the rest of the world to know about George Washington. So, and his house is right down the street. Here's Point of Graves, and if you take a right, it's one of the houses right down there, and you can go through it. And this is the picture of the Ranger. Next, and I'm doing this in order of when they were founded. And founded is a loose term. Sometimes they were used for something else, and then they were converted into burying grounds. So the latest information, or the furthest back, was 1671, and the Cotton family they didn't buy the land at first. This cemetery, everyone thinks is part of South Street, everyone knows where South Street and Sagamore. Well, there are actually 5 cemeteries in there. So this is one of them, and this faces South Street. And this is the Cotton Cemetery, which the city of Portsmouth has maintained ever since 1800 sometime. However, it was the Cotton family made an agreement with the province back then. This was all covered in trees, so they cut all the trees down and cleared the property. But they also went over to where Proprietor's Cemetery is. So that great big chunk of land was where the militia used to practice back in the 1700s, getting ready. Well, when they first did it, they didn't know they were going to war, but there was a militia around and they did practice. After some years, his family were given the property because they stopped the training up there. And so they fenced it off from Proprietor's Cemetery. And when the new pastor, I can't remember his first name, but the Reverend Haven, Haven School and Haven Park, when he came to town, they fenced this, the fence was already there. He got to use it to graze his horses. And then, so they started calling it the minister's graveyard, farmland up there. When he passed away, then the city gave him the Cottons the property. And that's when they started to intern people up in there. This right here is the newest edition of what the wall looks like. In the past 6 months, we've restored those 3 doors that you can see are in the dark green. And then these other 2 actually have remains in them still. They didn't need to be repaired, so we're having them brushed down and they'll be repainted. And then right across here, where it's gonna say Cotton Burying Grounds, 1721. So the rest of the world will know when they go by there now that that's where these Cotton Cemetery exists. And it's one of our colonial cemeteries here in Portsmouth. So, and again, this time last year, we cleaned, there's over 400 headstones in the cemetery. It doesn't look like it, there's some more down in there. We cleaned all 400 in 4 weekends by Memorial Day. So this has become our focus to restore this smaller cemetery so we can show people it can be done. You know, people say, oh, you can't do this, you can't do that, what have you. But it can be done. We were just up there yesterday and we are teaching people how to straighten the headstones, how they not wobble, but tilt or come front. And while we were doing that, we found 2 buried headstones that we didn't know were there. So if you like cemeteries and you like working in it, it was exciting for everybody. Yes, ma'am?
What do you use to clean the stones with?
There's a product that is pretty standard now. It's called D and the number 2. It's totally organic type of product. And I love it because you can do several things with it. You can wet the headstone down, spray some D2 on it, take a very soft brush, scrub, and instantly the dirt and what have you starts to come down. And then you can rinse it off again and you see the difference. Some stones we've had to do more than once. And then at the very end, you respray it. And some stones that we did 3 years ago down in North Cemetery are still bright white today. So we're hoping eventually we'll have a plan where all the headstones will look, we don't want them to look brand new. We just want them to be readable at this point. And so once they're all like that, then every year, or not even every year, they can go through and just spray more D2 on it. So going forward, it can be maintained and people can still read the headstones. Yes, sir?
What's behind the doors?
Nothing right now. These were actually, these two doors are connected, inside, there's no wall in between. That's where they put the bodies, in the wintertime when we had real winters and you couldn't dig in the cemetery. They haven't had to use it, I don't know, the people that own the cemeteries up there said about 20, 25 years, they haven't had to put anybody in there and save them until the spring comes. My grandfather was in there, I remember that when I was 13, because I asked where he was and they said, oh, he's up in the wall of the cemetery, so. These two people are Cottons, and I have to look up, do a little more research about who's buried, who's in there, so. Nobody knows why the chimney's there. It wasn't a crematory underneath, as far as anybody knows. They didn't do cremations. So, just more things to, if anybody has a spare minute to research, so. All right. In this cemetery, in Cotton Cemetery, this is the first headstone. I know, I said women didn't get it, and here I am again. Mary Tarleton and Elias, they're buried in the same plot, we're assuming, because they're on the same headstone. Only thing I could find out about Mary right now is that she moved from Newcastle. And Elias was associated with shipping somehow. It didn't specify whether he was an owner or just a mate or a captain or what have you, but I found his record that he definitely fought in the Revolutionary War. So then we come to Peter Shores, and this headstone's been cleaned, so it's really hard. The conditions are different in every single cemetery, but within the cemetery, every condition is everyone has their own little microcosm of what they get hit with. So this would be an example that we would go back up and clean it better and hope that the second or third cleaning will make it a little more legible. This is the frigate, the Raleigh, which is on the New Hampshire state flag. He was the first lieutenant along under the Captain Thomas Thompson, whose house is right over there and has been under wraps for the last 2 years being restored. That's where Thomas lived. Again, there wasn't a lot to find out about Peter other than he was definitely in the Revolution and he was on the Raleigh. That's all I could find right now. Then we come to William Cotton, who, the only thing I found out that he was a tanner here. And if you all know where, what's the fish market? I still want to call it Marconi's. Saunders Fish Market down on Pleasant Street. All that area on this side of the water used to be a big tannery. And I've read where there were a lot of slaves that worked in the tannery over there. So I'm assuming he was part owner or something like that of the business. Again, Catherine, I couldn't find anything out about her. But as I had said earlier, the Cottons did purchase the land at the very, when the city put it up for sale, somewhere in the timeline, they decided to keep it. They had it for free and then somewhere along the line. And they were a very influential family here in Portsmouth. There are over 15 Cottons buried up there. I looked up some of the names. A lot of them were involved in shipping, and some of them were just involved in being merchants in downtown Portsmouth at the time. And again, another woman with the headstone. The Salter family is also in here, and they too are a shipping magnet. They built ships. Titus actually owned four ships, but the rest of them actually helped to build ships or captain ships. And that's the one thing I found out. We were such a big boat community, starting at the Revolution. Before then, we built ships, but then, like, I guess, like today, because the war was coming, ship industry really picked up. And then in the 1840s, it really just took off. But the one thing it's hard to discern sometimes, some people actually built ships and sold them. Some people built ships and actually captained the ships too. So you could be an owner, a builder, or just be on the boat to, to sail the different, the triangle down in the West Indies. So again, Salter Street, which is down by Saunders Fish Market, it's on the other side. And that big white house that they've redone over the years that sits right there, well, that belonged to Titus Salter, who owned ships here in town as well as building it. That's where my mother lived when she met my father, who lived right down this on School Street by where the Havens were. My grandfather back in the day restored the house. It didn't look anything like that. And it was kind of sad when I saw them. Of course, obviously I didn't inherit the house. So my grandfather had planted lilacs down along the wall, the side of the house that faces Marcy Street. And they were there for years and years. And then when these people bought the house, who is a political family, not that that's important, but they tore out all the lilacs. So that was kind of sad. But life goes on. So North Cemetery, 1753. North Cemetery is over by the railroad tracks here in Portsmouth. And right next to it, abutting it, is Union Cemetery. This is the most well-known cemetery in the region because of William Whipple and John Langdon are buried there. And many people from all over the world even come, and when they're looking up cemeteries or genealogy or what have you, this is the cemetery that most people go to. It was put on the National Register back in 1798. Not that that gets you anything. I thought when I took over the cemetery committee, because we haven't had one for a long time, that it's like, oh, that means we can apply for grants and we can do this. They don't do anything. They just put your name on the list and that's it. And you should see the paperwork you have to fill out to get on this list. So, but it's something to be proud of. So last October, well, let me step back. In 2016, this wall here was torn down for a restoration because it was getting ready to fall down. So what happened, where that furthest stick is over there, they got that far and they discovered remains under the wall. So everything comes to a stop when you find remains in any cemetery. And they collected, there was actually pieces of the wooden caskets that, splinters of them and everything. So they collected the state collected all the remains, and one of an archaeologist here in the area has kept the remains since then. So back in October, after we got permission to rebury and do all of that, that's what the city did. And where those sticks are right now, luckily back in 2016, they put PVC pipe all the way down to mark roughly where the various remains came out. So that's what we did. We had a formal reburial. The minister from North Church came and conducted a ceremony. City officials and other people came. So, and she put them down the pipe. And she didn't just like throw them down. She had taken, there were something like 7 different people that were involved. And the largest bone fragment was about 4 inches long. So what she did was she wrapped them in linen, which would have been appropriate for that time period, and wrapped them up. And so when she placed them back down into the tubes, she let us know these are the remains of probably a 12-year-old boy. There was a couple of young children. There was a woman. And it was very touching. Everybody that was there was really. And so what we did, or the DPW did, was they, sealed the top of the pipes, put a piece of metal on top of it, and now that's totally covered with hay, and the grass is regrowing. And then we had to wait a couple weeks, but we got a stone that would match the rest of the cemetery, and we put up the plaque that said what happened, that these remains were found and they were returned to the location of where they were found. And they definitely were 1700 era. She was able to get some DNA samples done, and most archaeologists that deal in the cemetery and finding remains, they always try to find out what era they're from if they can, but it's really hard. So that was one of the cemetery's projects last year. So they got to go back, and the archaeologist who had them was really happy that finally they went back to where they belong. In North Cemetery, this is John Langdon, who was the signer of the Declaration of oh no, did I get it mixed up? Constitution, sorry, I always get him and Wimble. He signed the Constitution, and New Hampshire was the last signer of that, so he had that honor to keep everybody else waiting, all the other states. He actually formed his own militia. He spent his money, hired a militia, and actually went out and fought with them in various battles in the area. He went on to be a senator and a governor. He purchased the land for what is now Portsmouth Naval Shipyard. It wasn't exactly where it's sitting now. It was a little island before it, and that's where they built the Raleigh and the Ranger and more. So he became the head of the First Continental Navy, and he's the one that started Portsmouth Naval Shipyard. I couldn't find out what they called it back then. I don't know if they called it Portsmouth or not. There's no...
CV Island. I mean, that's one of the islands that it was.
Right, but yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I just don't know. I mean, he bought it, but I don't think he knew it was going to be the shipyard for the next 200 or 300 years. And this is a great example of a burial tomb. And we were talking about it the other day with somebody else, because people were asking me if, people were buried in vaults and things like that. Oh, when we were doing the yellow fever, people weren't buried in vaults like you can be today. You weren't necessarily buried 6 feet down either. That's just a more modern adaptation of what should go on in the cemetery. And we assume that people who had money wanted the burial tombs is because they didn't want to be put in the ground and let nature take its place, because there are still remains in this tomb. So anyway, what they do is they build a wooden structure, and then they put 3 layers of brick on top of the wooden structure, and its own weight when they remove the wood inside holds it up. So a lot of people come here to look at these barrel vaults because they're unusual, and a lot of them haven't survived over the years. So he's a one that was buried in a vault.
The casket be at ground level then?
No, they had shelves inside. The structure, I tried to get a picture of what it looks like, how they built it, but it's like if you were building a roof on a house, all these kinds of trestles and everything, like halfway down. Then once the whole structure with the 3 layers of bricks are done, then they remove those and they do build shelves inside, or stacking areas for.
And there is only the one casket in there of Langdon?
No, the family. No, there's,
Can you go back?
did I go back? Sorry. No, there are 9 people in there, including the wife of William Whipple, who was John Langdon's cousin. She ended up in his tomb, so.
Were they put it in wooden caskets, or were they wrapped in fabric, or?
I think they did both, depending. I'm not well versed, but from trying to locate yellow fever victims and reading about that, what they did with the yellow fever victims are they wrapped them up in some type of linen, and then those people they covered in tar and just put them right in the ground. But the linen part of it, when I was talking to the state archaeologists, you know, the linen probably would have been wrapped in linen and put into your coffin or your casket and then put in there. But I haven't read anything in the 3 years that I've been doing cemetery work that there was anything else. I mean, nobody made out of any kind of metal that was available at the time. I think they just went ahead and did the, and it might have been different types of wood that they used, but again, that's a whole nother area of research. But yeah, the people are in there.
Did you say that William Whipple's wife was in here?
Yeah,
Because she's a Moffat from the Moffat Ladder House. William Whipple was married to John Moffat's daughter. So I just don't know. I didn't realize she was in there.
yeah, she is, and the only reason I know for sure is because since I've been on this committee, we've been contacted by the signers of the Declaration of Independence. That's why Whipple has that little bronze plaque, that's what it says. Well, the same organization now is doing it for the wives of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. And that's where it's gonna go on to this, this tomb, because Catherine is about 3rd from the bottom down there, so. And we're just gonna place it on this, or they'll place it on the side. To me, this whole era it felt like it was incestuous, only because everybody was marrying somebody that was very local. So the Sheafs and the Whipples and the Langdons and the Moffats, the Sheafs, the Salter, all their families are intertwined once you start doing research, and it's real. And they all had, or many of them had large families. So it gets really confusing because they often named, you know, 5 generations of Benjamin or what have you. So it gets really complicated. So that's why I called this just the tidbits of who's buried, because you can definitely go. But she's definitely buried. His mother, Mary, is buried, his tomb's right there. There's a whole line of Whipples right down there, and his mother is, because when I first started doing it, I thought it was Mary Whipple that was his wife, but it's not, it's Catherine. So, and there are no Catherines down that line. So William Whipple, the signer, he he was in the Continental Congress for 2 years, and then he stepped away from it and let other people continue on with the work. They did give him the title of Brigadier General, and he actually fought with his troops. A lot of people that I found that I researched and other people have confirmed, they were given titles like captains or generals or what have you, and not that they were necessarily just an honorary degree, because they might have given X amount of money to raise for the militia or what have you. Many of them did fight with their troops, others did not. They supplied the money and backed what was going on. But the interesting point for him, for me, was that he was just what they call a common man. All these other people that were part of the Continental Congress, or the majority of, all went to Harvard or Princeton or Yale. So William didn't do any of those. At first he was a wealthy, he didn't own the boats, but they were merchants, and he sailed and was a very wealthy merchant. His whole family, there were 4 brothers that had a big trade going on between the West Indies and England and here. And then he and his brothers had a number of stores or merchants in town. So I found that more, because everybody knows he signed what he signed, but you know, to find out that he wasn't of the elite class is what, you know, if you went to Harvard, you were pretty elite. William Hart, this is still North Cemetery. North Cemetery has over 1,800 headstones, and it took us a year and a half to clean them. He too was an entrepreneur, and he had a chandlery down, I'm assuming like where Prescott Park and those areas are, because that's where there were 12 wharfs at that time down in there, where all the ships from all over the world came in and exchanged their goods down there. And that's also where they think the yellow fever came from, was someone came over on a ship that killed people back in 1798. So on his headstone, it says he's a mathematician. They called him that because he was the only one in New Hampshire, and maybe even Massachusetts, that he designed compasses and built them, along with other seafaring tools that were mathematical instruments. So according to what I've read about that, he was extremely wealthy just from that. However, he was one of those people that wouldn't sign the association, so he got shipped off to Exeter for a couple of years, and then you know, they let everybody go at that point when they let him out. But yeah, I thought that was interesting because he was well known in all the colonies because of his skill. Now, Dinah Chase Whipple and Prince Whipple. Has everybody heard of Prince Whipple? I'm assuming, right? The one, I'm sorry, what?
No, I haven't heard of it.
Oh, Prince Whipple. He was William Whipple's personal aide. He was an African American, and the whole time he went every place with the Whipple, and he even fought in the Revolution and what have you. There is great debate, if you're from this area, that the famous picture of Washington crossing the Delaware, there is a black or an African American in the picture. It's not Prince Whipple. So, but there's a debate that the gentleman that painted it just thought it would be appropriate because there were a lot of African Americans who were fighting in the Revolution. So he thought he would put a representation in that boat, but it's not Prince, not our Prince anyway. And he was one of the first people in New Hampshire, along with 36 other African Americans who fought in the Revolution. there was a freedom petition that they sent to, I believe it was Exeter, because that's when the head of the New Hampshire was, the capital. And it's a very moving document, and it's quite long, saying, hey, we just fought for freedom and equality. They didn't say what about us, but that's essentially what it was. And the state of New Hampshire did grant all of them their freedom. So and that was in 1779.
I read recently that then Governor Maggie Hassan signed an acceptance of the petition.
Oh, she did?
I read it
Yeah,
somewhere,
back
I
in,
don't
like,
know if it's
2012 or 2011, something like that. Yeah, this petition had been like on the desk for, hundreds of years.
Yeah.
So, they made a big deal, and she signed it, like,
Oh.
to make it official.
Oh.
There are copies of it available at the Moffett Lab House if you want to read the whole thing.
Yeah, it's quite,
Yeah, they have it upstairs, but they also have copies down in the gift shop.
right. It's quite moving. You especially when you realize the people how brutal the war was back in those days, and how much they suffered along with all the other militia that was fighting. I don't, truthfully, after reading so many different inserts, how we became free with the conditions that these men went through. So, but they got it. So his wife, Dinah Chase Whipple, she was a servant or slave to a pastor out in Newcastle. When she turned 21, he emancipated her. I can't find where it says how they met or what have you, but I do know from a book that talks about African Americans here. When they were here in the 1700s, they actually were allowed to congregate, and on Sundays they would go up to Calvary Cemetery is, if you don't know, out on Route 33, the big Catholic cemetery. Well, right across from there, they were allowed, all the slaves were allowed to meet there, and they had their own little political system, and they had the whole day of Sunday off, and they could do whatever they wanted, but they had their own system, and they decided on, voting against trying to, is this person going to run away or not run away? Do we want a petition? They did a lot of petitions to the city in whole to make conditions better. I mean, I can't give you anything specific other than that's what they said. I'm assuming maybe we can have Saturday night off or something like that. But it was a very active political group, and the owners up here allowed that to go on. So they were fortunate in that way. But I assume that's how everybody knew all the other slaves, because of their freedom to go. And Odeon Point was one of the big places also that people went out on Sundays afterwards, because it was walking distance from Portsmouth, and they would go out there and have picnics and what have you. Not that makes it great that they were enslaved, but that is a part of what they had to endure up here. So next is Dr. Hall Jackson. He invented digitalis, which maybe a lot of you in this room, I think they still use digitalis today. It's not as common as it was because it's a heart drug, and they found other things to go along, but he was known for that. He also commanded an artillery, and he was before he had his own artillery unit, when Bunker Hill happened, he was right down there the next day tending to the wounded at Bunker Hill. When he came back, that's when he got more politically involved. However, the other thing about him is, which most people don't know, is Portsmouth used to be the center of the medical world back in this time frame. Boston was not the center like it is for us nowadays with all those Portsmouth was, and people came from all over the world, or Europe, here to be trained by, there were 8 doctors at the time, and he just happens to be one of them, that took care of people in the city of Portsmouth, kept meticulous records, which is great, because we know who died from yellow fever, and at the same time there was a dysentery, I guess you would call it epidemic, was going on in another part. So there were like 150 people that died that summer in 1798. So we have meticulous records of what happened in the medical area for our people back in the 1700s. His house is right, or was, on the corner of Court Street and Washington. It's not there anymore because it's Strawberry Bank, but that's the house he lived in. And one of his sons went on to become a medical doctor here and was well known for all the things he did back in the day. We're still in North Cemetery, and Dominic Peduzzi was the first Catholic headstone to go into a burying ground in the city. When he came over, the Catholic Church wasn't established in Portsmouth. We had a lot of churches, but Catholic Church was not one of them. So he helped organize the Catholic Church here in this area. But his claim to fame is that he was a hot air balloonist. And he named one of his hot air balloons the city of Portsmouth. Don't know what it looks like, didn't find any descriptions or anything, but we're guessing this is the time frame. It could have looked, or he could have had flown all of them as far as that goes, but he put on air shows. He, just like they compared it to peas with the air shows coming out, he would do air shows in the area for people because hot air balloons were pretty unusual back then. And he owned the building where Pearl, what is the other one? Pearl and, I can't remember. In Market Square, Starbucks is right here. You go across that little area is High Street. The store right on the corner, it's geared for 20-something clothing store. Opal and Pearl, I think it's what it is. That was his store. And he owned the whole building. So that's where he worked out of for a long time. And he also was a merchant as well as helping with the church and doing balloon demonstrations. And his wife also has a headstone in North Cemetery, just like that. Then, still in North Cemetery is Jane Boyd. George Boyd was a prolific shipbuilder. He built over 55 ships in his lifetime, which is a lot. He, instead of taking the association pledge, he went to England. He got on a boat, went to England, and his wife, Jane, took care of the business after that. He stayed in England for 4 or 5 years, and then on the way back, when he decided it was safe to come back, this headstone or tablet was on the ship that he was on, sailing back, and he died 2 days before he got here. So, and that's a nice story, but my point, the contrast is, this is what he got. His wife ran the business for him and kept it going, and this is what she got. Not even acknowledged that she was married to him, so, nothing, so. Alexander Henderson, he came from Scotland. He was a merchant, and I just listed married to the chiefs just to show again, everybody, all the families intermarried one way or another. He was accused of being a royalist because he had come from Scotland, but for some reason they believed him and he never got persecuted or sent to Exeter. And he didn't sign the petition either, but somehow I guess it's who you know. And he did fight in the Revolutionary War. The carver of his headstone was John Homer, and again, he was out of Boston. And again, very elaborate. I didn't do any backgrounds on the carvers because that would be another whole presentation. Thomas Harvey, he fought from 1774 to 1886 in the Revolutionary War. Now, if you go online and you type in timeline of the Revolutionary War, American Revolutionary War, you'll get anything from 1765 up to 1890. So it just depends on what they're, where they're coming from, and included some wars or skirmishes in as part of that. But this gentleman did. He fought all over the place, and he actually fought with Lafayette up in New York in the Battle of Burgoyne, and he saved his life. Lafayette had gotten stabbed or bayoneted on his horse and had fallen off, and Thomas Harvey had seen him, carried him to safety, and got him to a surgeon, as they called him in those days, but nobody knew who had done it. So when Lafayette came, he did a grand tour of the colonies in 1825. Someone knew that Thomas had saved his life, and Lafayette did come to Portsmouth. So when he came, he went to the party and reintroduced himself, because people had told him Lafayette had been looking for the person who had saved him. And after that, they remained in contact until Lafayette died. So I thought that was kind of cool, that how fate can bring you in a full circle, but they stayed in touch. So Thomas Thompson, he was the captain of the Raleigh when it was launched, and that's who Peter Shores was under as the first lieutenant. And this is the ship that's on the flag, New Hampshire flag. Pleasant Street, that's where my grandparents are buried, and we cleaned the headstones. This was once called South Cemetery, an actual South Cemetery, because the South Church owned it. Back in the 1700s, there was a lot of conflict that went on within the churches, so churches broke up all the time. So that's why we have North Church downtown, and South Church was actually up where the old, on the hill on Marcy Street, the yellow building that looks like a library at times, that's where the meeting house used to be. And they, when they broke off, this was South Cemetery, and then North Church started burying people up in North Cemetery, or downtown. John Wendell Esquire family, again, this is a very current picture. That's what it looks like at the far end of Pleasant Street Cemetery. He had a very large family in the area, and they were very influential too. There were 3 or 4 lawyers in the family, merchants. Some of them were part of the trade, but they put the money into having someone go to the West Indies, pick up whatever it is they were looking for, and then bring it back to them. So, and the remains are still in there. The people, it was leaking very badly about 10 years ago, so they had to go inside and repair it, and the Griffins told me there's 6 or 7 remains still in there. Peter Coos, this is in Pleasant Street, and this headstone is 5 feet tall. So that's very tall for a headstone. Peter did fight in the Revolution, and he was a captain on some ships for a little while, but not very long. So I just wanted to show you again what weird sizes are in the cemeteries, or can be.
How much stone would have to be below ground?
Oh, there's probably, let's go back. Probably like not half as much as this, but a third at least, if not more. And especially because this one's not tilting front, back, or side or anything. The one that we found buried up at Cotton yesterday, it was about a third of what was above ground, and it was a pretty big headstone. It would probably sat about this tall. So, and again, this would be a display of money. Sometimes it's not necessarily how fancy it is, but I looked up both Mary Manning and Elizabeth Babb. They had families here, but I did a lot of my research at the Athenaeum, and they couldn't help me find anything more than the families existed, but nothing on what they did, how they did it, or what have you. And I picked these for the interest because, as you can see, the one has a skeleton on it, which there is no other, right here, that's a skeleton, right there. I asked the guys that have been mowing for a long time because they're familiar with all the headstones too. This is the only one in Portsmouth Cemeteries that the city takes care of that has the skeleton, and I looked up the meaning, it simply means death. So there was no other hidden meaning. And this one, Elizabeth Bath, I thought it looked like a coffin for, and she was 18, I believe, that's on this one. Yeah, age 18, or I don't know, it just reminded me of coffin, and I haven't seen any others that look like that in all the cemeteries that we do. So, Hall Cemetery, almost done. Hall Cemetery, this is a new cemetery that we found here in the last 3 years. It was new in the fact that the city had just totally neglected it. And this is what it looked like 3 years ago, and this is what it looks like today when we clear cut everything and went, there's a path right next to that. We clear cut that. You couldn't even walk down the path. It was just totally filled with trees. And even though this looks like a big mess right now, by the end of the summer, we hope that all of this will have ground cover on it, so it will be totally low maintenance. There are a lot of headstones that are laying flat and even buried up there right now. And this was just done last December. There were a lot of halls, or there are. Luckily, we have the names. Back in the 70s and 80s, Louise Tallman, wonderful woman, I wish I could have met her. She and her friends went to every single cemetery here in Portsmouth and in Rye and Greenland, and they documented every single headstone. And if those women had not done it, we would have because church records have disappeared, and that's who would have kept track of who was buried and where they were buried. North Church lost a lot of their records in a fire years ago. The city of Portsmouth is not sure where some of the records from that time period really are, and the Athenaeum has been looking for them too, but so there's just bits and pieces out there of who's who. So, but the halls were, again, they fought, a lot of the members fought in the Revolutionary War. A lot of other people, like Peter Shores, who was the first lieutenant, his family's buried in Hall Cemetery, his wife Mary and a couple of sons, and his son's headstone reads "Lost at Sea," and you'll see quite a few of those headstones. There's no one there. but they still put up a headstone for them back in the day. Yeah.
Where's Hall? Where is it?
Oh, it's on, if you go down South Street, I'm not sure everybody knows where South Street. The big cemetery is on the corner with the 5. If you go, like you're going towards downtown Portsmouth, when you go down past Junkins Ave, on the right-hand side, it's behind somebody's house. That's why it was easy for the city
So
to
it's
just...
kind of at the edge of South End?
Right, it's in South End. And unfortunately, what happened up until about 40 years ago, there was a family that lived on South Street who took care of the cemetery for years and years and years. And it, according to everything we've read, there's no pictures, he took great care of it. And then when he passed away, nobody stepped up. And as I said, I've got 15, 20 reports from the newspapers saying how deplorable our cemeteries have been over the years. So it was easy for it to get neglected. So our game plan, along working with DPW, is there's ground cover up there now, but we want to fill in all the spaces that are blank. There used to be wild roses, and the shrubs and stuff in the summertime were taller than me. So that's the game plan for that. And then raise up all the headstones again and identify them. Yeah.
So on the records thing, I just recently found out that towns in the state of New Hampshire are required to do a town book every year and keep their vital statistics in that book. So they have to record births, deaths, and all that sort of thing. Cities do not.
Oh. Well,
So they do something, I guess, but they're not required to publish a town report.
publish, yeah.
Town report,
Right.
whereas the legislature requires towns to do that in New Hampshire.
When I first started doing any research back 3 years ago, the city does have several big ledger books downstairs, but trying to read the cursive back then is Greek. You know, you really have to have a lot of patience, and I found that if I use a magnifying glass, it becomes much clearer of what it is. And I'm hoping that those 2 ledgers, they're in this time frame, may hold some key information to the cemeteries and who is buried there, and maybe what headstones were missing or what have you. Yeah.
There's some new programs in AI that can read better than, we can read cursive.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, now.
Okay. I can't add anything more to my own as yet.
So that's one good thing, I guess, about AI.
Well, no, but I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's something we have 9 people on our committee, and a lot of people can't get out physically to do clean headstones. They take on projects like that. So that's good to know. And most of them are pretty computer savvy. So that would be a good project for someone. Nathaniel Jones, I don't know how the Joneses tie into the halls and the shores, but they do. They're in the cemetery. What got my attention about this is that it said he died in New Orleans in 1825, and I've seen some other headstones scattered around that say the same thing. So I looked up what happened in Louisiana, but it didn't. I typed in battles, whatever, and then finally I said, I remember the biologist or the forensic gentleman from UH saying that New Orleans was a big place where they had yellow fever. So I typed in yellow fever, and guess what came up? There was a big yellow fever epidemic in New Orleans in 1825. So a number of people, for some reason, from Portsmouth were down in that area. But again, I think it's incredible to show that they shipped them back up to Portsmouth. So that's why. And then Mary Shores was the wife of Peter Shores. And again, another woman had a headstone. Union Cemetery, we're hitting the end. This was the first designed cemetery here in Portsmouth. and a landscape architect from Boston designed it. And through all my research, especially on this project, more than I realized, that just about everybody buried in here had something to do with shipbuilding, captains, or owned the store that they invested money in the ship that was going and came back. This is our hardest cemetery because in the backside there, we're gonna have to pressure wash. There are stones, you'll see that we can't even read right now. And you can pressure wash only if you have an expert do it. Don't try to pressure wash anything. I mean, the newer headstone's fine, but the old ones, you can do it if you have an expert. This was Charles Bailey. He was involved in the shipping trade. And I picked this one because that sign is the fraternal organization of the Oddfellows, which was very big back in the day. They were, charity and helping out in communities. And this is the building that's associated with them, which is right downtown Portsmouth on the corner of Congress and Fleet Street. It still stands today.
Question, is there any consistency on where the bodies are buried relative to the monuments? I mean,
Yes.
Typically,
Yeah.
the head is at the monument?
Right, a lot of the monuments probably have 18 names on them. They used all 4 sides. And yes, they would put little foot scrolls at the bottom, and some of them just say mother or father and just give a simple name and you're supposed to read it. But yes, the foots are all at the edge, so their heads were all buried by the obelisk that's going. And I didn't notice any lot down there that wasn't like that. That was standard.
Well, looking at the slide you had of Union, I think it was the prior one, and you see this alleyway.
Yeah.
So everyone, looking at the monuments on the left-hand side, people are basically buried under the alleyway, is that correct?
No,
No,
no, they're buried behind it with their head towards the monument.
okay, gotcha.
Yeah, just the reverse. And that building way down at the back was the receiving tomb, which we would like to restore. But this, again, was for wealthy people, and it was, turn of the century or mid-century, and there was a lot of competition, so people were trying to outdo each other with their headstones, and I read that all over the place. So we'll start with George, who technically has the largest obelisk in the he built the first 2 clipper ships, and back in the day, clipper ships were like our America's Cup. The other builders would build clipper ships and they would race, to a destination, but they would all start at the same time. They weren't just doing it for fun. So if they were going to go to Barbados, they all had something on it, but they timed how long it took them to get there. He had over 55 ships that he built. He didn't keep any of them. And he sold, a lot of them went to New York and Boston. A lot of them went to New York. And he did all the ships. If you're into shipbuilding, sloops, brigs, barks, and schooners, which all are very different, but I have, again, that could be another presentation. Then comes the Dennett family. Most of their family was involved in shipping or being a captain or owning a ship. They went into building, but they were part of that trade, shipping trade. The Hams, he might be related to me, I don't know. Same thing, just another builder. And this is my examples of, some of these have already been cleaned once or tried to get just to a reading, and we couldn't get anything off of them. So the Downses did own ships and kept going, and I don't know who this is on the other side. We won't know until we get it cleaned, because in the record, it wasn't really clear about who was buried there, so I don't know at this point. Sure.
Aside from the other one, just for a second.
Yeah.
This is the Dennett.
The
On the left is the Dennett.
Dennett, yeah. They were big, and Dennett Street is named after their family. Downs, the Fernald family were big shippers and builders. The stories that I read was basically Fernald and Rains were not mortal enemies, but definitely big competitors back in their day. And they tried to outdo each other no matter what they were doing. And their shipyards were next. Because where Union Cemetery is, that's where all the a lot of shipyards were, right along North Mill Pond. So, and even on the other side, that's where Reserves, the Boyds, the Rains, the Fernald, a lot of shipbuilders, as well on the other side too. Yeah?
There's actually a small Fernald family cemetery in the shipyard, because they were the ones who actually owned Fernald Island, which was the first island they purchased.
Right.
So there's a small, nothing that quite that grand, but there is a small cemetery there.
Yeah. Yeah. Back in the day, it didn't, I know it was Maine and New Hampshire, but they all knew each other. It was one big Piscataqua basin, and they all worked together and knew each other. Again, another Dennett family, a different branch, but they too were in shipping. And then Bailey, he owned a few ships and also helped build ships along the way. Then we have Rogers and the Treadwells. And I think I left one monument out, but needless to say, that's what exists over there, and it's basically all, you know, the wives and the children, but that's what it ended up being about shipbuilding. Elmwood is on the bottom of Cotton, and there is no, well, I picked this one. There are very few. There are a lot of plots still open up there, but no one has been buried per se, except when I found this, and I'm trying to find out who buried, how he got buried there, and finding the records even today is pretty hard. So we all know he didn't bury himself. So, so that's just to point out, you know, the cemeteries are not in the top of any city's list, particularly unless you're like Washington, D.C. or New York and some of the larger places that use them as parks on a regular basis.
Would families have bought plots on that land, or would the
In-
cemetery own that land?
In Union, we ended up getting it when it was full. They just got deeded over to the city. But yes, they would have pre-bought lots. They could do that. Oh, or are you talking about Elmwood?
That had so much open space?
No, I think I'm trying to ascertain that it's really true, but people call this the pauper cemetery. So if somebody died here in Portsmouth and they couldn't locate family or what have you, this is where they would bury you. But again, rumors take on a life of their own. But this may be a very usable cemetery for us going forward, so.
There may be a lot of bodies in there, a lot of remains.
Well, there could be. So he's buried there. I couldn't pull anything up readily about him. And this is my last one. And does anybody recognize what language that might be? Because I have no clue, and I Googled it, and it didn't come up with anything. So somebody thought maybe Greek Orthodox or... Yeah.
Or even, Bangkok. Although it's got a high sign on the left.
Yeah, so I should have brought a prize, so if any...
No, I think it is a South Asian language, but not
You think so?
high. I think it's Greek.
It looks like Greek.
That's a
High, except for the X.
I, alpha, nu, alpha, gamma, iota,
Fishes.
tau, I can't remember.
Yeah. It's,
It's Greek, or it uses Greek.
It is Greek to me right now, so. Yeah,
The one that was Tewksbury, you're saying that that one is in what is
It called
colloquially known as
the pauper.
South,
Oh, South, yes, Cotton Cemetery is inside that wall of, where there's 5 cemeteries, but everybody just calls it South Street Cemetery.
Right.
Yeah,
and the other story you hear is that there are no more burials in South Street Cemetery.
that's
And-
correct.
But I've seen hearses going in there.
And I can clarify that for you.
10.
I'm sorry, what?
This last, the previous Tewksbury died in 2010.
Right, but that's in the city graveyard, that we are responsible for. So that's why it's frustrating I can't find out. But the other proprietors, then you have Harmony Grove, and then you have Sagamore. Sagamore and Harmony Grove are owned by the Griffin family and run by a trust. However, there are maybe 100 plots left down there. That's why I'm interested in Elmwood for us. He only takes calls from funeral homes because it's a private cemetery. The funeral homes came to him and they worked out an agreement a number of years ago because they knew eventually there weren't going to be any spaces. But so that's the reason that you can't buy a plot there. There are no available plots in the city cemeteries. I can't speak for the Catholic cemetery. I think they still have some, and then the what?
I'm the manager of the Catholic.
Did somebody call you? I've been sending people your way, giving your number. Thanks, guys, for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah, answer questions if you have to leave. I wasn't sure how long it would take. Let me grab you right here.
And just real quick, we were walking through South Street Cemetery not too long ago, and I saw 2 very new markers for people who won the Congressional Medal of Honor. And one was on a grave from like the 1850s.
Yeah.
One was rather contemporary, and they both look like very new markers. Do you know anything about those?
They might. They're white, right?
Yes.
That's because they've been cleaned. Michael Griffin, one of the family members, is on the cemetery committee, and that's how good D2 works. They look like they're new headstones, but they're not. And those particular veterans have been ignored, so they were extra special meaning to quite a few people last year, and they really made an effort. I just want to grab this lady over here then.
2 questions. So is it true like the city has to have burial places for their citizens? Like
Yes, it is.
So where in Portsmouth,
Well, you can't even, we have to have a space, but you can't buy a space, if that's what you're looking to do.
yeah, so I'm just confused, are there cemetery, let's say, someone dies in your family 10 years from now, where would they go? Or you have to go to the funeral home, is that it?
No, it gets confusing. In the next couple of years, we'll have the problem solved where the city will have to purchase land or lease land from other cemeteries, which you can do that, the state, so that people have a place. But again, I think you agree, there's no pre-buying plots anymore, not just here in Portsmouth, a lot of places, so. What did you?
Catholic Church.
I'm sorry, what?
You can't buy it, pre-buy it at Calvary, absolutely.
Okay, well, but do you have to still be Catholic to be in?
You have to be Christian.
Christian, oh, that's a good thing to know. I get a lot of questions. And I just sent a couple, gave them your information this past week, so. Yeah.
The really thin headstones, I love them, but they're like, some are so really thin, like in
The slate headstones,
graves and,
slate.
in some of the other cemeteries, why were they that thin?
Oh, because I can't speak to that specifically, but there wasn't a lot of emphasis on burying people, and slate was probably,
Yes.
that was the tradition, and I don't know where the slate came from, so it had to be brought in. There wasn't slate around here that I know of. I've talked to, like, the Griffin family, so, yeah.
When did they switch from sticks, you know, making a cross, or just sticking a piece of wood carved?
Well, actually, there
to
is,
the, headstones, I mean, you know,
Oh.
headstones.
I don't know, I haven't come across any, but we have a wooden cross for a headstone in Cotton Cemetery. Matter of fact, I just cleaned it and it looked really good. It's been painted white, and last year when we were cleaning up there, I did that because everybody said, oh, don't bother, and I was amazed. It was like, you know, cleaning your bathroom wall, like with all the scum, you know, and it, like, oh, this looks pretty good. And I was just there yesterday and it still looks pretty good, so.
So I just want to pop in real
Yeah.
quick. We are at 8:30, so this is technically the end of the program. Thank you all for coming. If you want to stick around and if Sue is willing, yeah, we can do a couple more questions, but the program has officially ended. Just so everyone.
Oh,
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.